Okay, I think we can restart now. I would like to say hello to everybody, and I'm happy that you all joined our today's session. I would like to say to welcome today Veronika Seidlová from Czech University in Prague, and Sylvia Jakubczyk-Ślęczka from the Jagiellonian University in Kraków. We decided to have a conversation on the state of research on Jewish, especially liturgical music in the Czech Republic and in Poland and Central Europe, maybe in general, because actually this is why we met. I know Veronika for many years because we studied together at Czech University. I met Sylvia some years ago when we both were fellows at the Center for Jewish History in New York, and with both we are regularly in contact, and we are discussing issues we are encountering during our research in both countries. We would like to structure the conversation like in 4 parts. Everybody will have a short presentation or a short talk on her own research experience, and then we'll have a discussion and open. Yeah, everybody is invited to write, or also during our presentation, you're invited to write your comments or questions, and I'll try to see them, or maybe Geraldine or Laurie, you can also tell me if I haven't seen something in the chat. But I think we'll turn over to the questions at the end. We would like to start with Sylvia's presentation. Sylvia is a musicologist, and she earned her PhD at Jagiellonian University in Kraków, where she now works as a lecturer. Her dissertation is dedicated to the topic of the musical life of the Jewish community in the former Galician lands in the interwar period. So please, Sylvia.
Thank you, Martha. Good evening, everyone, or good morning, everyone. So I start with my presentation. Okay, I hope it's visible right now. So I'd like to say a few words about the state of research on Jewish liturgical music in Poland, and mostly about the works which were written in Polish. Of course, there won't be too much to say. In Polish, there were printed just, I believe, just these 5 books about Jewish music, and not necessarily only about Jewish liturgical music. The first book dedicated to Jewish music in Poland was written by Izachar Fater. It was printed in Yiddish in 1970, and it was translated into Polish in 1997. The second book is Polish Judaica by Professor Marian Fuchs. It is a story mostly about Warsaw, about Jewish music in Warsaw, just before the Second World War and during the war period. The third book is also by Professor Marian Fuchs, and it is a book of famous musicians of Jewish roots, where are the biograms of famous musicians, not only Polish musicians, but I put this book here because it's one of the very few publications dedicated to Jewish music at all, which was published in Polish. But in recent years, there's increasing interest in the topic. So in 2013, there was written a book by Professor Bożena Muszkalska from Wrocław University, And the title of the book is The Music in the Religious Life of Ashkenazi Jews. And this book is mostly the introduction to the topic of Jewish music, Jewish musical culture, the first this kind of book in Polish. And in 2014, it was also published a kind of lexicon about Jews in musical culture of Polish lands, written by Professor Leon Tadeusz Błaszczyk. And here we can find a lot of biograms of Jewish musicians from 19th and 20th century, but still biograms. And what is visible in all these books is that the authors focused mostly on biographies, less on music itself. And what is also very interesting and very sad, that in this Polish translation of Vater's book, Jewish music in Poland in the interwar period, in the Yiddish version, there are the scores of some compositions by Jewish authors, by Jewish composers in Poland. In Polish translation, this section was omitted, completely omitted. So we got only the biograms, but no music, no scores. And I'd like to also say a few words about what is the place of Jewish music in Polish musicology. So the general approach is that Jewish music is a subject of ethnomusicological research. So historical musicology is not interested too much in Jewish music, is almost completely not interested in Jewish music. It's like people think that only ethnomusicologists should study the topic. And because of this, some Polish ethnomusicologists in recent years published books like the one I mentioned by Professor Muszkalska. There are also a few articles by Professor Dalik, ethnomusicologist from Warsaw, and Professor Jerz, also from Warsaw. The biggest interest is generated by the festivals, and but also there are organized more and more often the lectures, guest lectures by professors from abroad. And such lectures were organized in Warsaw, where Professor Filip Borman spoke a few years ago, and Wrocław with Professor Marcin Wodziński and Professor Bożena Muszkalska is very interested in the topic. They cooperated. It's a good example of a cooperation between musicology and Jewish studies. So they organized lectures by Professor Edwin Serusi also, the whole cycle of lecture. The second approach, the second aspect of this approach toward Jewish music is also the place of Jewish musicians in historical musicology. And what we can see in this field, there's a general tendency to assimilate Jewish musicians. Usually musicologists are interested in famous Jews of Polish origin. And it's also, the problem is that people are not prepared and not usually interested in Jewish sources. And because of that, they write about Polish aspect of activity of famous musicians like Józef Kofler, like famous violinist Huberman or Gimpel or Wolfsthal, and they highlight the Polish activity. So sometimes it's even like that, especially there's an example of Józef Kofler, which is called in the Polish musicology the first Polish dodecaphonist. It's of course true. Kofler is also very complicated, very complex person, very complex personality, and his worldview was also very complex. But he was engaged also in the activity of the Jewish community in Lwów, which is omitted in Polish narration about him. Maybe not on purpose, but it is like that. So the chance for change is cultural studies. Polish musicology generally is historically oriented, so it's still in progress. Yeah, this coming to this new approach. But the first signs are visible thanks of Professor Halina Goldberg, who writes articles dedicated to Jewish composers in Polish Romanticism. When she writes about Chopin, she mentions, for example, Jankiel, which is a person who appeared in Polish a famous Polish epic by Mickiewicz, and she compared them with each other. And thanks of this, she drew the attention of people toward the Jewish question also in Polish history and Polish music. And yeah, there was also very good and very interesting initiative. There was published a journal titled Musicalia Judaica, which was edited by Professor Michał Bristiger from Warsaw. However, after the death of Professor, the journal stopped to be published. In recent years, there were also some conferences about Jewish music. When I started my adventure with the research on Jewish music, there was nothing like it. The only source of knowledge on Jewish music was festivals, especially Jewish Culture Festival in Kraków. And the library of Janusz Makuch is like still one of the biggest library on Jewish music in Poland. So that was the beginning. But in recent years, there appear the conferences dedicated to the topic, like the conference in Polin Museum in Warsaw in 2013. A very short, very brief conference, but it was. And now, in next 2 weeks, there will be the next conference dedicated to Jews in the music culture of Galicia, which will take place at Rzeszów University, which is also an interesting and necessary step forward. What is also a problem is that Jewish music and the Jewish studies in Poland is almost absent. Sometimes I know from Kraków, for example, that there's probably still no lecture dedicated to Jewish liturgy. So even students of musicology don't have chance to get the knowledge about it, to start the research, to get to know the context of the music in religious life of Jews. So it's also important. And as I said, the main sources of knowledge and place of rising interest in the subject are festivals. The festival in Kraków, festivals in Warszawa and Wrocław especially. And what have to change this situation is probably the approach toward the paradigm of musicology, because Polish musicology is still very German, very historically oriented. And if it will develop toward the culturally oriented musicology, this is the best chance for a change. And now I'd like to say a few words about my own research. I want to talk about the whole dissertation. I just like to say a few words about this part dedicated to synagogue music. The whole dissertation was dedicated to musical life of Jewish community in the former Galicia area in the interwar period. I divided it into 3 chapters. The first one was dedicated to Jewish music institutions and organizations in Galicia. The second one to the role of music in social life of Jews in Galicia. And the third one to music works and socio-political context. And in this third chapter, I discussed also the repertoire of the synagogue. Especially, I discussed the approach toward the reform of synagogue music in Galicia, which is very, very interesting topic. And I discussed the 3 cantors who were active in Lwów and Kraków. Baruch Shor, who is very famous, but also 2 less known cantors, like Baruch Kinstler from Lwów and Eliezer Goldberg from Kraków. I wrote a short note on their biographies and characteristic of their musical style. I put there also a short analysis of pieces founded in American and Israel's archive. It is the next problem, because in Poland, we have no archival sources dedicated to this music. All the notes, all the scores were destroyed, and really in Polish archives, it's probably impossible to find the music of Polish cantors, especially from Galicia. So in my research, I used mostly a press, Polish and in Polish and in Yiddish from the whole Galicia. And from there, I found the biographical data of the cantors, and I also transcribed some of the manuscripts, which I put in the appendix. And And now, because Shor is well known, so I will omit his creativity, and I would like to show you the examples from the excerpts of the creative activity of the works of Eliezer Goldberg and Baruch Kinstler. About Eliezer Goldberg was a cantor who was active in Kraków. He was born in 1846 in Volhynia, today Ukraine, and it is really hearable in his music. We can find there some the influence of Hasidic style, the influence of Orthodox church music. His music sounds sometimes like Byzantine chant. And the harmony with this drawn fifths is very, very interesting and very touchful also. He often used Ukrainian Dorian hexachord. He often used Hasidic style. He also took something from art music, like musical illustration, musical rhetorical figures. What is interesting, he was autodidact. He had no musical education, but he wrote for voices choir. He didn't write down his composition by himself. He always had someone who helped him, but he composed this music. And now I'd like to present an excerpt of 3 of his composition. Seu Sharim will be like the 4-voice choir piece, which is very, it sounds like an anthem, it's very homophonic. And Kitzva will be the example of this Hasidic style in Eliezer Goldberg's music. And the Kol Ba'ei Olam will be, it's my favorite example. It's like this, it's very similar to Byzantine music. So let's play it. The next example is Kitzva. I didn't have any recording of this piece, so I will play it as a MIDI file. And the third example, the Kol Ba'ei Olam. what we could also hear in this example was like there were these jumps of interval of fourth and fifth, like in Hasidic Nigunim gates, which divided also this piece into the smaller sections. And the second composer, Baruch Kinstler, he is also a very interesting example. Baruch Kinstler, like probably all the cantors in Lviv, were influenced also by the cantors of Ukraine, of Odessa especially. His real name was Baruch Pogacz, but because of the artistry of his composition, the local community of Lviv called him Kinstler, like an artist, yeah. And his works are very, very interesting. He seems to model them on the early music polyphony, like on the works like Bach and like composers like Bach and Handel. And it was also I know just a few of his compositions, but it was written in the articles from the interval period by the Alfred Plon, who was the director of the Jewish Music Society in Lviv, and he was a reviewer of the Zionist daily Chwila in Lviv. What also Kinstler used is musical rhetorical figures and segmental form. It's very interesting because in Kraków, there was a reviewer who said that, who very criticized the works by Sulzer, by Lewandowski, who really wanted to defend Kraków against the Western influences, especially German influences. That was the point of his critique. And he said that Jews in Galicia, in Poland, should model their music, their new synagogue music, on the this early music polyphony style. Yeah, and I don't know if he knew the music by Kinstler, but Kinstler did what this reviewer said, what was written in the Kraków press. And now I'd like to play just a short example, a short excerpt from the composition Kike Shimcho, and it wanted to be MIDI file. And what we will hear in this composition is this illustrative tools when he will illustrate in the music the word from the Kike Shimcho. He's likened to a broken shard, withering grass, a fading flower, a passing shade, a dissipating cloud, a blowing wind, flying dust, and a fleeting dream. So let's listen a small part. And this recording comes from the concert I had the pleasure to co-organize, which took place 2 years ago in Rzeszów Philharmonic. And this, the soloist of this concert was my friend and cantor, Ben Matis, who is also present today here. He's a cantor, he's a professional singer, he's a researcher, he's a performer of Polish synagogue music and a popularizer of Polish synagogue music also in Poland. And he was one of the editors of musical volume of the journal Polin, Studies in Polish Jewry. And now I'd like to ask him to continue this story about Polish synagogue music and the state of research on the topic.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that nice introduction, Sylvia. Luckily, she didn't play the part where I come in the Kike Shimcho because I wasn't crazy about the performance, but very beautiful piece, very effective. what got my notice, what made me interested rather in Polish synagogue music specifically, was watching the highlights from these cultural festivals. They're, in my opinion, I think they're very good, but they're also a little kitschy. And the musical content, on the other hand, is almost entirely American. And I felt that this was completely a disservice to Polish Jewry and the history of Polish Jewry, because we have an amazing history in Poland. And there were all these composers and all these kazanim and all these choral conductors. And while, yes, there's a great deal of that music which is missing, as Sylvia rightly points out, sometimes you can find these little gems in places. So I was in Boca Raton at Florida Atlantic University 2 years ago, and it just turns out that Baruch Kinstler's entire opus in a big fat score is sitting in a library in Boca Raton. So I'm hoping to get my friend Sylvia down to Florida at some point. We can go look at it together. But the problem is, and as Sylvia mentions, one of the major issues in Jewish music research, especially liturgical Jewish music research, is that people don't know the liturgy. I mean, this is a major problem. And one musicologist, not Polish musicologist, an American musicologist, once referred to the text of Kadosh Ata from the High Holiday Service, which is a magnificent conclusion to the Kedusha section, and talks about God as the great king of justice, and the holy king. And this particular musicologist described it as a dirge. It is not a dirge. No composition I've ever heard of that piece is a dirge. So that's one thing. Or another musicologist of considerable note once said that Shema Yisrael was in fact something Jews said when they died, and that was the only time they said it. Again, a bit of a misnomer for any of us who are even remotely familiar with the repertoire, with the liturgy, and of course the cantorial repertoire. When we worked on Pauline, volume 32, with my eminent co-editors, Anthony Polonsky and Francois Gonnet, it was very hard to get articles on the cantorate, and I had hoped that we'd have a much larger section on it, but it was very difficult. My colleague and friend Daniel Katz, who's on this call, wrote a very nice article. But again, you know, it was hard to find articles, and generally speaking, a lot of the research that I have read is frequently full of holes. Either they know the musicology, but they don't know the general historical background. They don't know the music, or they do know the music, but they don't understand it because they've never spoken to a cantor about the inside and outsides of how these modes work. Or they simply don't know the liturgy, and this is a problem. So you have to kind of know all three to really start to do this kind of work. I've only just begun this sort of working on this, and it's difficult because it requires knowing about a lot of esoteric information. That's not to say there's not really good work out there, because there is, but it's in the early stages, I think, and this is true of Jewish musicology generally. It's still in an early stage, especially regarding the cantorate, but I think that will change in time. Uh-oh, Sylvia's sending me a note here. Or is she? Ah, right. So that's, yeah, it's an issue. And I further wanted to say that I am working on a new book project with Mark Kligman at UCLA and Bear Kotlerman, who's a Yiddishist, on the cantorate in Eastern Europe, which we hope to have together in a couple of years. It might take a while. But we are looking for authors. So those of you who are interested in submitting, we would love to look at that. Right, so next year, as Sylvia reminds me rightly, because of the interest of several members of the choir that I worked with at that concert in Rzeszów, I've been invited to sing with the Krakow Philharmonic Choir in a program of Eastern European and particularly Polish music for the Krakow Philharmonic. And I was quite insistent, and they quite understood that I wanted not to do American repertoire or greatest hits stuff. In fact, I chose repertoire that probably has either not been recorded ever, or has been, people know about it but haven't done. But I chose deliberately pieces that I felt needed to be heard because they were great music. I mean, really great music, including Novakovsky, but not the usual Novakovsky, or for that matter, Dunayevsky, but not the usual Dunayevsky. And I felt that it needed to, this needs to be heard. It's really sophisticated. It's very operatic. It's very beautiful. And there are fugues in it. I mean, these guys knew how to compose. And they knew they had a gift for a tune. And so we decided to do this concert of this stuff. And hopefully this plague of ours of late will disappear so I can actually get to Europe to do this concert next year. But it's a very exciting project we're hoping to record. Ultimately, it's my aim to record as much of this music as possible because you can't teach about it without hearing it. And you could talk about music, but as Stravinsky said, it's like dancing about architecture. You really kind of miss something if you can't hear the music. So, and you can describe it, but you don't get the flavor of it. And so it's my feeling that if we can record it and then be able to use this as a teaching tool, in addition to being fabulous to listen to, it's great. Would be a really wonderful opportunity for us to begin to understand this stuff. So in conclusion, be able to have the recordings available. People, I think they really need to have some familiarity with the liturgy, and they don't have to go to centers of Jewish learning for that, because I can recommend one book that I know by my teacher, Reuven Hammer, Zichron Livracha, of Entering Jewish Prayer, which is pretty simple and really good. And there's another one on the High Holidays. And, if you have at least a passing knowledge of the liturgy, your appreciation for these things and the words and the text in context, in larger context, makes it really all the more enjoyable, more appreciative. I mean, I can love those recordings to death, but until I knew what the words were, and in the context of the service and the context of the nusach that it was supposed to be, I really didn't enjoy it nearly as much as I did when I studied it and I understood it from an insider's perspective, or at least a little bit as an insider. So that's what I've got, Sylvia, unless I need to add anything. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to turn over to the Czech Republic, and I would like to give a short overview on research on Jewish music, especially liturgical music in the Czech Republic or Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia. Before we turn to Veronika's presentation, you might be familiar with the name Paul Nettle. He was a musicologist, music professor in Prague in the interwar period, and he was one of the most productive author on or researcher on Jewish music in that period. And actually on many topics, he did research on early music, and he also researched the early, the cases of early organs in Prague synagogues. And actually until today, his findings are cited and referenced. Then I would like to speak shortly about one interesting project, because I dealt very much with that. This was a musicological project, and actually the ethnographical project, even if they didn't call it like that, from the 1930s. This was a young composer, Sigmund Schul, who came as a refugee from Germany, from Nazi Germany already. In 1933, he came to Prague, and he met an old, man from the Jewish community, from a very traditional Prague family. He was called Salomon Lieben. And Salomon Lieben asked the young music student and composer Sigmund Schul to transcribe all the chants of the small synagogue where Lieben went regularly, and he asked to transcribe these chants. So and from this, actually, this was the beginning of a 7 years project. Over 7 years, they met regularly several times a week to sit down and transcribe these chants. And this is very interesting on one hand, because it is a documentation of chants from a traditional Orthodox minyan in Prague, and we don't have many other music or written music actually from this context. So, and on the other hand, it's important because it was really shortly, actually the project was ended by the Holocaust, by the Shoah, because when Salomon Lieben was deported first to Terezin and then to another concentration camp where he died. I wrote an article on that. It was published in Judaica Bohemia. Here you can see one example from this collection. It's about like 250 chants. Yeah, and Sigmund Schul, he's a quite known composer also because he was in Terezin. He composed as well. He died in Terezin, and it's interesting also because it was planned as a musicological project. Schul he wanted to analyze these chants to find out what is especially Jewish about that, and so on. It's very much actually a project of that time. Okay, to continue with my overview over the research on Jewish music. Of course, there is this gap of the Shoah. After the Shoah, during the socialist time in the Czech Republic, there was actually nearly no research on Jewish topics, except at the State Jewish Museum. The huge Jewish Museum in Prague was turned became a state museum, and within the museum, there was still research going on, but the people there were very much concentrated, focusing on very detailed topics on documenting symmetries, on making lists of materials or objects in the collections. However, this was important work which can be built upon today, but of course Jewishness and Jewish life wasn't seen as a religion, but they just dealt with the objects which were there. In the 1990s, or from maybe the late 1980s already, there was a rising interest in Jewish composers in Terezin, especially. So actually there are quite a lot monographs about and research done, and also in the performance you see many associations started or artists started to reperform music which was written in Terezin or by composers who have been in Terezin. This often the approach is more like to see the Jewish contribution, as Sylvia already she mentioned this, but like to see the Jewish contribution to the classical music, let's say, but not the Jewish music in itself, or the Jewish liturgical music as a music to be researched. Then also from the historical perspective, there is from the 1990s onwards, there is very, there are quite a lot of historians dealing with Prague and its Czech, German, Jewish history and the relationships. Often this has as an ethnocentric perspective. This is only changing in the recent years. And actually, this was also the starting point for my dissertation, where I wanted to research the Prague Jewish community in a historical perspective in the second half of the 19th century until the Shoah. But what was interesting for me was the everyday practice, like music, Jewish music as an everyday practice of the people in the community, like religious practice and music connected with this. My main sources were archival sources from the Jewish community archives, which are today at the Jewish Museum in Prague and the Prague City Archives. And then the music collections. And there is a huge music collection at the Prague Jewish Museum, which is there like for many decades, but actually very few people are working with this or did work with this material until now, because it's only accessible since for 20 years now or 15 years. And additionally, there is the structural problem. I think that in the Jewish Museum in Prague, I think as well as in many other Jewish museums in Europe, there who have or which have huge collections, there is rarely a musicologist or someone who's really understanding music, who knows what to do with this music, how to process it, how to make it accessible, and so on. Yeah, I think I'll make this short, and I'll just play an example of one composer and cantor from Prague, Baruch Gutmann. He lived from 1863 to 1950, and he was from 1890 onwards. He was the Oberkantor of the Pinka Synagogue in Prague for many decades, and he taught many other Prague cantors, and we will listen to a Kaddish, which he published in the 1930s. He published 2 volumes of his music in the 1930s on his own by the author. I guess it's not very very widespread, this music, because I don't know how many copies of this publication exist. This is from the music collection in Prague, and the recording was made by Steve Moore, who also joined us, our colleague who also joined us for the earlier COZ. He did a recording with his choir in like 3-4 years ago with his project Performing the Jewish Archive. So I will share the recording. So I think I'll skip the rest and give the word to Veronika Seidlová. And she is she earned her PhD in anthropology at the Charles University in Prague, where she is now an assistant professor. Her dissertation is on the journey of mantra from India to the Czech Republic, a contribution to ethnography of music and globalization. However, her main field of research is for many years the music practice in Jewish communities in the Czech Republic. And she also published The Forgotten Voice of the Jeruzalemská Synagogue in Prague, a CD of recordings of the Prague cantor Ladislav Moshe Blum, which he made during worship in the 1970s and 80s, if I'm right. So Veronika, please.
Okay, hello. Good evening to everybody from Hradec Králové. Yeah, thank you, Martha. I was supposed to actually introduce Martha, but then suddenly things kind of skipped. So I just want to say a few words first about Martha and to thank her. Yeah. I think it was in 2008 when I worked in the National Museum in Prague at the Czech Museum of Music, and I was working at preparing an exhibition about the Beatles and the Beatlemania in Czechoslovakia in the communist era. And suddenly I got an email from some Martha Stellmacher from Germany that she's writing her master's thesis about Zygmunt Schul, and she's interested in the Jewish music in the Czech lands. And I was so excited because after basically, that was actually the first time somebody actually shared my research interest geographically. Yeah, before I went to different conferences and of course ethnomusicological conferences, and there were great scholars talking about Jewish music, and I also had a great mentor at the COZ, where I went for my Erasmus. Dr. Alexander Knapp. I hope he's here because he was extremely helpful in my research. He helped me so much. So I also would like to express my thanks to him. And I'll talk about our project a little bit later. But as Martha mentioned, the CD of Cantor Ladislav Blum, I would have never actually managed to do that project alone, because I actually came as an outsider. Yeah, as Ben Mattis mentioned, what is important in this field is actually to understand the liturgy as well, and that's something what I completely lacked. So as an undergraduate student in 2002-2001 in the Czech Republic, because of a great luck, I basically received a treasure from the wife of Cantor Blum, and she gave me his recordings, which basically he made secretly during the communist era, and which were never published. And I got audio cassettes, 40 audio cassettes. I got oral history interviews with his wife because Cantor Blum died, but I didn't know what actually is on those cassettes. So without the help of many people, and mainly Alexander Knapp, I wouldn't have managed actually to publish it. So then basically, I started working at the National Museum in Prague, and my research of Jewish music was stopped for a moment. And then Martha appeared. And since then, I'm happy actually to cooperate. And in my research, I basically profit from her research a lot. Yeah. And not only in my research, but also in my publications. So without her, I think that I wouldn't be able also to do many things. I wouldn't be able to publish, and so I'll come to it. Yeah, and I would really wish that that Martha would continue in her Jewish music research. So fine. So please let me just share the screen shortly. Okay. Fine. So you heard from Martha what was the state of research, let's say till the year 2000, and she also talked a bit about her own research, which was done, as you know, Martha is, or you might know, Martha is from Germany, and so she was always affiliated mainly to the universities in Germany. However, now I would like to talk about the current platform for Jewish music research, if I can say it, in the Czech Republic. So, so I would say that it is the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology at the Faculty of Humanities, Charles University. And basically there is a larger research group of anthropologists, and within which we have a team of 3 ethnomusicologists, Zuzana Jurková, who is the head of the ethnomusicology team, and she has established ethnomusicology studies in the Czech Republic, basically in the sense of anthropology of music. Yeah, so she has been teaching ethnomusicology there for 20 years. Then I'm there, and also we have a colleague from Slovenia, David Verbuč. And basically the context for actually the whole platform for the studies of Jewish music, not just liturgical, but any Jewish music, is there because of Zuzana Jurková. Yeah. So Zuzana Jurková was one of the founders of the study group Music and Minorities of the International Council for Traditional Music. And she herself is a specialist in Romani music, but she has always had an interest in Jewish music, and also in 1980s she has even attended some of the services of before mentioned cantor Ladislav Blum in the Jeruzalemská synagogue, and she knew him personally, actually, and she kind of saved it. She was kind of saving it for herself as a research topic for some time, and then I joined the faculty as an undergraduate student in 2001, and when I told her that I would like to write a BA thesis about Jewish music, but I didn't have a clue about about Jewish music, and as an outsider, I didn't have any access to the community and basically to anybody. But she actually suggested that I should that she told me, she shared her knowledge so far about the subject. She said, as Martha mentioned, yeah, there was in the post-war period, there basically was no research on okay, there was just research on music of the Jewish musicians who performed or composed basically the Western art music, and mostly there is a research about the Theresienstadt composers. However, since since basically the end of the Second World War, there hasn't been basically any systematic research about the Jewish music as about the music of the Jewish people as a minority for themselves. Yeah, there hasn't been any research about the Jewish liturgical music, systematic, in depth. So she suggested me that I should basically start this oral history research with the wife of Cantor Blum, and then basically that's how the whole thing started. And so our main research topic is music of minorities, as I said, and now currently, especially in the connection to collective memory. And this interest of ours is reflected in courses which we teach, and also in international summer schools which we organize. For example, in 2015, we had Professor K. Kaufman-Stellmacher from Harvard teaching a summer school on Jewish music, Jewish cultures through its music. That's how it was called. And basically, I teach a course on musical anthropology of Jewish communities. So we also have a course dedicated really to Jewish music. And so I myself conducted research since 2002, and in 2006 I conducted music ethnography research. It was about I conducted ethnographic research among the Jewish communities in Prague, and I was interested how basically at that time six different religious communities in Prague, how do they negotiate their Jewishness, and how do they negotiate the Jewish identity through singing, through chanting, and how do they perform it? So then I had a gap of a few years, but then I've been involved again since, let's say, 2012, and I've been returning regularly to the field since 2017. And now I had a great opportunity to provide texts and audiovisual material for the section music for the new permanent exhibition of the Jewish Museum in Prague, which is supposed to be open in December 2020 if everything goes well. So I would like to show you if the link works actually, just a preview. Now, it is still in Czech. Okay, sorry, I should have done it this way. Okay, I'll open it. Okay, is it visible? Martha, can you see it? No.
No. I think you need to share another screen, maybe.
I think you need to stop the previous screen share first, yeah.
Okay. I'll share it then as a separate. Okay. Okay, is it now visible?
Yes, it works.
Yeah, great. So so although my background and my main research interest doesn't go into the history, so because of this exhibition I had to dig in history. So now this exhibition will be the first one where actually Jewish liturgical music will be presented currently in some exhibitions in the Czech lands and maybe elsewhere. So I consciously decided to overrepresent Jewish liturgical music from the Czech lands, because it was not just like underrepresented, it was not represented anywhere at all. So although first the Jewish Museum wanted exactly the Theresienstadt composers, and they also wanted me to write about Gustav Mahler and for example, David Popper, the violoncellist and the composer. I basically deliberately underestimated this part of music history, and I overrepresented the Jewish liturgical music from the Czech lands. So I would like to show you. I had to basically I had to make. Maybe you can see it here. I had to make some biographical sketches of, or biographical profiles of selected famous composers. Now, of course, this is difficult. Yeah, this is this discourse of famous, big famous men. But how do you do it in in Jewish liturgical music? Then, of course, one has to. Plus, there is a question of sources. So, of course, I had to focus on the composers who published printed scores, who published their work, and who composed and who worked in the Czech lands. So basically, I focused on the composers from the 19th century. Maybe you can see here. I start with František Škroub. Maybe you can see him here. Yeah, who was a Czech composer, and he himself was practicing Catholicism, but he also worked as an organist for the synagogue in the Dušní Street in Prague, and he was one of the main or crucial actors who implemented the reform, who implemented the music reform, basically in the Czech lands in 1830s. So, and then there were some local composers like Max Löwenstam. I don't think we would have time to play some music, but if we have, we can then play it during the discussion. Moritz Pereles, David Rubin, you might have heard of David Rubin. Samuel Welsh, maybe that could be interesting for our American colleagues, because Samuel Welsh was one of the composers of the American Minhag, but he was from Prague, and he actually returned to Prague after his engagement in America. Then there is a profile of Moritz Wallerstein and his son Konrad Wallerstein, and also of Leo Kornitzer. Okay, and then I have a section on famous cantors, where I basically focus more on the post-war period. So if in the section about the composers, I focus on the second half of 19th century and first half of 20th century, here in the section about famous synagogue cantors, I focus on the post-war situation and post-war cantors who became extremely important during the communist era, because the communist regime basically was anti-Semitic, and the Jewish communities which were which were trying to revive themselves after the Shoah, they mostly lacked rabbis. So the cantors actually took over the roles of the rabbis as well, and they were the crucial actors of the revival of the Jewish communities in Czechoslovakia. So For example, I can mention, if you can see him, Victor Feuerlicht. And only recently I have found out that actually there was one research, ethnomusicological research, which also involved Czechoslovakia, post-war Czechoslovakia, and that was the research of Judith Frigyši, who was supposed to be here today, but she couldn't because she had to go. She excused herself because she had to go to hospital today, and so actually she had done a short research at the end of 1970s and in 1980 in Prague, and she made extremely interesting recordings of the Prague cantors, mainly of the cantor Feuerlicht, and these recordings are now stored in the National Library in Israel, and they are also open. Some of them are, they can be heard on the website of the National Library. And you might know that Judith Frigyši has published a very interesting, amazing book, Writing on Water, The Sound of Jewish Prayer. And she mentions some, she has basically a few pages about her research in Prague in the communist era, which is extremely interesting for everybody who wants to do some research in the Czech Republic. Yeah. So, okay, let me close it. So then there are a few bios of cantors from the post-war period, where basically also because of this wish of the Jewish Museum in Prague to have a music section in their exhibition, I was kind of motivated to also look for more audio recordings which were published during the post-war period. And that's how I discovered, of course, more and more about the post-war period. And I presented some of my findings in Hannover last September. So I'm not going to talk about it much here, but basically there is a chapter about Josef Weiss, then about a cantor Samuel Landerer, then about the cantor from Brno, Alexander Neufeld, and of course there is a profile of my favorite Ladislav Moshe Blum, and there are of course his recordings as well. So yeah, okay, I will just stop sharing. As the time is running, I wanted to talk about my recent, just a second, about my recent research. Okay. Sorry. Which is about, I'm interested in the negotiation of music remembering. So I'm interested in this, right now I'm interested in the social life of the organ in Prague's Jeruzalemská synagogue, because in last few years it has been actually against all expectations. It has been revived as the only working organ, synagogue organ, as the only working synagogue organ in the Czech Republic. However, it is not used strictly for ritual purposes because the community which revived it is Orthodox. So the community doesn't use it for rituals. However, they use it in many different in many different areas, and they mainly the organist actually encourages not just the encourages the remembering. They encourage, actually they perform the archive. So not only, as Martha was speaking about it, there is this amazing collection of the scores of Jewish music from the interwar period and the 19th century. So now Jeruzalemská synagogue, thanks to its organist Václav Peter, actually became the platform. I'll jump to Václav Peter. Okay, so thanks to Václav Peter, Jeruzalemská synagogue became the platform of performing the music which is found in the Jewish Museum. And actually he also initiated the repair of the organ, and in 2008, and then the repair of the organ happened. Major repair happened in 2012, when actually he found music scores hidden in the closet on the organ loft. Yeah, you can see the organ behind him, and there is also the closet behind where the scores were found. And these were the scores which actually remained on the place since the Holocaust. Yeah, there was in the synagogue, there was an amazing mixed choir, and Martha would, of course, say much more about it, because that's also part of her dissertation. But basically, the scores of the chief cantors and of the choir remained there. The scores, not the people, mostly the scores survived the Shoah untouched, and then the whole communist era and then also the 90s, the Renaissance and everything. Basically, they remained untouched till 2012, when Václav Peter discovered them, and because of him, actually, Jewish community in Prague established its first music collection in their archive, which is not part of the Jewish Museum collection. That's why I'm mentioning it, and it's not still accessible for the public. However, I helped with cataloging, and then mainly Martha, whom I involved, did the terrible cataloging work, because she does understand also liturgy much more than I do. And so she did the terrible work of cataloging and scanning and describing everything. And then, of course, she used it in her dissertation. And while doing this amazing research, Václav Peter actually started playing this music, which he found in the closet. And I just should mention that the other person on the slide is his son, the chief rabbi of the Prague Jewish community, David Peter, who basically, I would say, he himself says that he's a traditional rabbi, but then he admits in different interviews that basically he is Orthodox. However, he supports the activities of his father, Václav Peter, who is an organist, educated organist, and who himself converted to Judaism. So there is this amazing situation, very specific, of this remembering of the pre-Holocaust music, which both these men actually bring to life. And yeah, I can just show him. And then not only he plays this music regularly during tours, now because of COVID this is stopped, but during regular tours in the synagogue, but then he also plays it before Shabbat, he plays it before Yom Kippur, just before the Yom Kippur starts, he plays Kol Nidrei, and then the cantor comes and he sings Kol Nidrei without organ, and then the whole thing starts. But then he also organized organ concert series. Every month there is an organ concert in the synagogue, and Václav Peter brings he brings young Czech composers, mostly non-Jewish, to the synagogue, and he asks them to compose new music for the organ and for the synagogue, not for the ritual, but again for this festival. So there are new music compositions dedicated to the organ itself and to the synagogue, and also Václav Peter published a CD called Musical Treasures of the Jerusalem Synagogue, where basically this music found on the loft is played. So maybe I'll just play, and Martha had again helped with this a lot, and she was involved in this project. So here you can hear the new recording from 2016 of the scores found on the loft as an unpublished music composition by the Jeruzalemská synagogue chief cantor Adolf Heitmann. And so you can hear the reconstruction of his composition. So that would be just a short example, and yeah. So basically here we can observe how the Jewish music is revived in interesting circumstances in Prague, and also the research of this music. And yeah, I would be very happy if you would join me in this adventure. Okay, so that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Veronika. And thank you again, Sylvia, as well. I think I would open now for questions, and I've seen some already in the chat. There was the question regarding Polish music, if there is research or has been research on post-war Jewish choral music in Poland and on Jewish choirs.
I don't think so, frankly speaking. Just after the war, of course, there were some Jewish institutions, and there was kind of attempt to recreate the religious and cultural life of Jews in Poland. But after '68, I think it wasn't impossible, and there was no atmosphere to write about it. And it's still a problem. As I show you, the first book on Jewish music in Poland was printed in the 1989. So it is a time when Poland stopped being communist, yeah, officially. So this is the problem with the research on Jewish music after the war. And I don't know any of this any kind of this research dedicating to the post-war period.
Actually, I asked the question because I visited somewhere in Katowice and they had a sort of some archival material relating to it. So I just wondered whether people had been exploring it, now obviously, because it wasn't possible before, but it might be a topic, that's all I was thinking.
Yeah, I think that this kind of research is possible in local communities, because in many local communities there's a lot of people which are interested in the topic, who creates many very interesting initiatives, who creates many institutions especially in synagogues, and they try to remember the Jewish history of these places. And in such places, it's possible that there are exhibitions, that there are some kind of lectures, but it's more complicated when we come to the publication or historical research, like scholar research, yeah, something like it about the music. I don't think so it was done.
Niels Falsch also had a question for Sylvia. Do you know something about the Yiddish tango rage in Poland? And Niels, if you are still there, you're also invited to.
It's also a very interesting topic. It's also there's a lack of serious research on this topic. Yeah, there are some popular publications which discuss this issue. There's a very interesting article with the title Polish Song of Jewish Origin. Yeah, so it's like a phrase which also musicologists used for the Polish composers of Jewish origin. Yeah, so it also it shows us the kind of the way of thinking about Jewish composers, Jewish musicians in Poland also. But the topic is fascinating. The period about we talking about, yeah, like interwar Polish Jewish music, it's like the golden age of Polish popular music at all. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's amazing. The publication which touches this topic is the book by Lerski, who wrote about Syrena recordings. So here we can find some historical details on the topic, but no, we don't have any advanced research on the whole issue.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Rachel, you said you had another question for Sylvia?
Yes, I did.
Please.
Sylvia, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation, and it made me think of the last EAJS conference that was actually in Prague at the Jagiellonian University. So I was having lots of nostalgia and thinking about the trip that I took. And you were talking about these 5 books on Jewish music that had been published in Poland. And one of the things that I remember right before I went to Krakow was that the Polish government had been debating a law that essentially criminalized anyone who blamed the Poles for anything that happened during the Holocaust. And I went to the museum, the Jewish museum in the synagogue in Krakow, and it was this fascinating experience seeing, this detailed look at this Jewish community that had somehow, and nobody could quite explain how, had just sort of gone away in 1945. And so I'm just kind of wondering how in Poland the vanishing of the Jewish community is presented to students. Like if you were to study Jewish music at the Jagiellonian University and some kid in the class raised their hand and said, "This is fascinating, where are the Jews now?" I'm kind of wondering how that is dealt with.
It is a very interesting question. I'm not a historian, and I don't know how historians at the university level talk about it. I think they just say true, yeah. But I think that most important would be the question how it is presented in the lower level of education, where everybody has to be involved in it. And frankly speaking, in many schools in Poland, it's like the education of the history ends with 1939, 1935 probably, and we don't talk too much about the communist times. It is because in, for example, my parents' generation, they couldn't talk about it. There was only official communist history of Poland in this time. Yeah, we couldn't say about many things connected with Polish difficult story. with also communist crimes on Poles. So the strength it like survives, yeah, because in my school also was like that. In our elementary school and in our secondary school, we didn't talk about the time after 1945. And I can't remember that's of the Holocaust. Yeah, of course for Poles it's obvious what's happened here. Yeah, it's you don't need to hear it in the school, but on the history, yeah, in some school of course people talk about it. In many also it's like you don't have a time to realize the whole program, and this 45 is the end of the history lesson.
That's interesting. But it was wonderful to hear sort of how you and the university are sort of dealing with this and approaching it. Like I said, that your presentation gave me a lot of nostalgia, particularly also because my grandmother was from Krakow. So yeah, thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
There is another question now for Veronika. Lawrence Scher, please go ahead.
Hello, Veronika. It's nice to see you again. I was in Prague and met with Veronika and her mentor, Zuzana. And Veronika didn't mention, she didn't show the CD that she has referenced, and she very kindly gave me a copy when I was there. This is the music of Ladislav Blum. It's got a very extensive booklet inside, which has information about all the tracks and both the content of the liturgy, and it's got information about Ladislav Blum. So I have a question for you. This CD, does it contain all of the cassette music you found, or are there additional recordings of Blum that have not yet been released?
Thank you, Lawrence. No, this is just a compilation of very few recordings, because he actually recorded himself quite extensively throughout a few years from late 1970s till maybe till 1983, 1985. And he recorded, okay, I just explained that basically he hid the magnetophone player under his cantor's table, and he covered it with a cloth. And then before the people arrived to the synagogue for the service, he switched on the button, and then basically the magnetophone was on. Yeah, and then when it stopped, it stopped. So here he managed to record most or many of the full liturgies throughout the whole liturgical year, but basically usually they are not complete because the magnetophone stopped after after certain time, after 2 hours or so. And so now these recordings are stored in the phonogram archive in Vienna, where basically I asked my colleagues from the phonogram archive to store them there and to digitize them, because at the time the Jewish Museum in Prague didn't have any infrastructure basically to do it. And and this phonogram archive was the closest to Prague. So, and they were extremely helpful. So thanks to them, everything is digitized. And I have to say that my cataloging work was is still a bit incomplete, because really, as Ben Mattis mentioned, this requires the knowledge of Jewish liturgy. So of course I had some descriptions on the magnetophone, on the audio cassettes by Cantor Blum, what kind of occasion it was, but that's it. Yeah, so really a thorough cataloging would be great, and I just cataloged some part of it. And basically the compilation was done by me and Dr. Alex Knapp, and the first CD consists of the famous compositions like by Herschmann or by Kusevetsky, performed by Bloom. If you wish, I can play you a little example of, because he had an amazing voice, and although he was already in his 70s, he still had a great, let's say, he had a great technique. And then the second CD basically is, these are excerpts from the liturgies live. So on one hand, the first CD, this is something what he recorded not during the service, he just recorded it on the loft, but not in the context of the ritual. But then the second CD are really live recordings from the services. But there is much more. And plus there are recordings of his mixed choir, which he established with his wife for the Jewish community in Prague. But this mixed choir was not used in liturgies. They didn't perform during the services. They performed mostly during the Holocaust memorials in Terezín. And also they performed during the Hanukkah and Purim celebrations at the community. So there are also recordings of this choir.
Right. Are there, the biography that's in this booklet is illuminating. Are there any more full biographies? The story of his survival during the Holocaust in Hungary, and then being transferred to various work camps and ending up very late in the war at the camp in Theresienstadt, and then having his first opera role there. Is there any more information about that?
Sorry, I missed now the question. If there are more biographical information about Bloom or about other cantors like him?
No, about Bloom himself, about how he survived in the Holocaust.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I mostly have information from the oral history interviews with his wife, but of course she was not the eyewitness. And then I had some documents which Cantor Bloom himself preserved, and also his own biography written in hand for the purpose of the Jewish community in Prague. So he claimed in his one-page biography, he claimed that basically he escaped from how he escaped the Hungarian work camp in Jelšava, then he got into another camp, then he escaped, and he survived in Bratislava till he was arrested by Gestapo. So that's how he actually survived most of the war. And then even he managed to study the operatic singing, and he wanted to, although he was a lawyer actually, but his grandfather was a cantor. He didn't at the beginning, he didn't want to become a cantor. Yeah, so he actually wanted to become the operatic singer, and so he studied operatic singing in Budapest with his future wife Terezie, and then when he got arrested in Bratislava, he got to the Theresienstadt camp, to the Theresienstadt ghetto. Actually, he got there very late in January 1945, but there he performed in different operas under the direction of the director Hanuš Stein, and mostly he performed in the Hoffmann Tales as Hoffmann, again under the direction of Hanuš Stein. So that was actually his first solo debut. as an operatic singer or as a performer, and paradoxically it was in Theresienstadt. And then afterwards he worked in different theaters. He worked, after the war, he worked in the Operetta of Budapest, and he also worked in Ústí nad Labem theater. And only in 1960s, when all the people who actually studied cantorial art in Vienna or elsewhere, in Prague or with private teachers, so the professional cantors, when they all either died or emigrated, those who remained, those who survived the Shoah, so then only it was actually his turn. He remained one of the last basically 3 people who could actually lead the service in the cantorial way. So he took it up as only in 1960s. Yeah. So yeah. Sorry, I don't want to give a lecture on about that, but yeah.
Could we listen shortly to one of his recordings, his liturgical pieces, for example? And maybe in the meantime, Agnes Corey is raising her hand. If it's
so I'll play it.
Yeah, if you have it already, yeah. So go ahead. Maybe
can
then
we'll have question quickly.
Okay, yes? Quickly, if it refers to this, yeah.
Yeah, just to be sure. Sorry if I missed something, but this Cantor Blum, was he actually Hungarian?
Actually, he came from the family in Lučenec, Lošonc, which is more or less near Bratislava. Now it is in southern Slovakia, but he basically, this was a Hungarian-speaking Jewish community in what is today southern Slovakia.
Sure, and could you just remind me of his first name? Very sorry, I missed it.
Laci or Ladislav Moshe Blum.
Laszlo Blum.
Yes.
There's something for me to research. Okay, thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I'll play it quickly. Okay. Okay, just let me. Recording from 1980 by himself. Okay, so he recorded this in very kind of underground situation, basically just himself on the organ loft with the organist who is on the picture next to him, Josef Kšica, who was at that time in his 20s as a student at the Academy of Music. Now he is the Regenschory, the director of the organ loft in the St. Vitus Cathedral at the Prague Castle. And they just had one cassette player, and that's it. So, and that's how it survived. And only in 1990, a few of the recordings were published in Vienna on a gramophone disc. But this was these original audio cassette recordings. But this was like some kind of obscure recording which was available only for friends, and that was it. So, so yeah, and he was also the last one who actually used the organ accompaniment in the service. He was the last cantor who systematically used the organ in the synagogue during the liturgies. That's it.
One question to this recording from Malcolm, and then we turn to the really very last two questions. Who's the composer of that setting? Was it Blum himself?
No. Okay, I don't know it by heart now. I think it's Mordechai Hershman, but I'm not sure. But he used the compositions of Kusevitsky's and Mordechai Hershman and of Richard Tucker. So, but then also he most likely composed one Hashkiveinu. I didn't play that. But it's on the CD. So this mostly okay. This was really the difficult part. What Alexander Knapp did in such an amazing way. So he actually looked into the authorship of these compositions. Yeah, and he found the original composers of this music, and he consulted also with many cantors in the UK. So yeah, that's really his part, and I'm grateful to him, because without him it wouldn't, the CD wouldn't be published.
Thank you. Let's turn to Ben Mattis. He would like to react on an earlier question regarding Polish research into pop music.
Yeah,
Ben?
Thank you, Martha. There's actually a great deal of interest in this. So, I mean, in this volume of Poland, Kamara Sztima wrote a very good article about it. There is interest, definitely. I mean, certainly by Americans. Bob Rothstein, Beth Holmgren, Joel Rubin, all wrote very good articles on tango. And when I was last in Kraków, well, maybe 2 trips ago or something, there's this book by Dariusz Michalski, who I won't insult you by trying to pronounce the Polish, but a very famous pop song, I Have a Date with Her at 9 o'clock. Isn't that what it says, basically? I think so. But this is a whole very thick book on Polish popular entertainment in the period, and it does not shy away from the Jewish issue, from what I can read. So it's a fascinating topic, but there's a lot written on it, and a lot more being written on it all the time, because it's a fascinating topic, and let's be honest, if you've ever heard these tangos, they're really a lot of fun. They're really great. That's it.
Thank you, Ben. Please, the last question, because we nearly filled 2 hours. Alex Klein, you said you have a question for everyone.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Clearly.
Okay. I thank everybody for their research. It's absolutely phenomenal, and without you guys, we wouldn't have what we have. But there are also again, Veronika mentioned this, that if Bloom wouldn't have switched the button on during his services, we wouldn't be able to hear what these great cantors sounded like. There are numerous recordings of the great cantors actually in live services, which people like Moishe Orsha, Moishe Kozovitsky, Label of Oldman, etc., etc. Some of them are, I think, at the FAU, and others at probably other universities. The problem is that the lay person has the clue what is happening within their own religion or their own culture, and how do we get from the professional, musicologists, ethnic musicologists like we are, because we love this and it's our bread and butter, so to speak, and we hellish, if that's the right word, for this research and what we can find out, because we do it online, and I personally have a group of people that we exchange all sorts of things with. But to get it out there to the public, because they're missing so much. If we can have Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, etc., why can't we have Lewandowski, Sulzer, Mombach, Janikowski, etc., out there? They're as good as in their own way. They are cult heroes. Their compositions are works of art. But our people, the Jewish people around the world, never get a chance to listen, to hear, to understand, or to know these things. How can we put it out there? How do we, instead of locking it up into vaults at universities, so it could be there for years and years and years, and all of a sudden somebody's doing a dissertation, so where do I get so-and-so from? So they go around the university and find, hey presto, they find something. That is not the idea of what I think of music that should be loved and enjoyed for what it is. Have you any suggestions? You know my passion. I hope you got all that.
Veronika, you are muted.
Okay, Alex, that was a question for me, or I thought it is more of a general.
It's for everybody.
Everybody. Yeah, sure, we need recordings. And I was always wondering, as you said, if Cantor Bloom didn't switch the button, and if he actually didn't hide the cassette player, we wouldn't be able to hear it now. And actually, his student, who was the cantor of the Jeruzalemská synagogue after him, the historian Sasha Putík, he told me that, when Cantor Bloom really didn't want anybody to find out. Most importantly, his friends from the Minyan. And he was kind of ashamed. Yeah. So Sasha Putík told me that when he found out that actually Cantor Bloom is hiding something under the table, he peeped in, and Cantor Bloom was kind of red in his face, and he was very embarrassed and a bit angry, and he didn't know what to say. And but then he didn't comment on anything, and neither did Sasha Putík. And obviously the recording continued. And I always wondered when actually, or how did he get the idea even to record the full services? And I actually think that it was because of Judith Frigyši, who came to Prague. And she came with the idea not to record the so-called cantorial hits, as I also played one to you, but or the cantorial compositions for performance, but she actually was interested in recording the full services also in the old new synagogue, and she managed to do it. And at that time, because of some weird coincidences, she recorded in the Old New Synagogue, but she didn't record Bloom, and she hasn't met Bloom. I actually think that they hid Bloom from her because there was some rivalry between the cantors in the place. But simply, I think that Bloom got this idea because of this ethnomusicologist, young Hungarian, also Jewish, but she was interested in the full services, and that's why I think he actually did it. And so maybe it is important to I think Jeremiah Lockwood told me about some practices of people hiding their cassette players in Sidurim or under the coat or so on. I mean, of course, the recording of liturgies, of services, this is a very ambiguous and ethically very difficult question. And I think it always depends on the negotiation on the consent of the people involved, but how do you get the consent? So this is a really difficult question, and the ethnomusicologist.
Sorry,
yeah,
Veronika. I just wanted to add another aspect that I think there are recordings which are not done yet, or which, as you said, the setting must be there, and if people consent to make a recording. But I think there are a lot of recordings, as you said earlier, Alex. There are a lot of recordings somewhere which are not accessible because either they're in private hands, or they're in communities who don't really care or don't even know about what they have. I've been in, in my research, I've found material, sheet music, written music, or even recordings like cassettes in communities who didn't really care, who said, but we don't have the opportunity to play these cassettes anymore, so no use. And also actually the same was the case in Prague, in the Jewish community, with the music collection Veronika spoke about, the choir music and organ music from before the war, the pre-war period. And actually because there is no ritual use for this anymore, there is no organ and no choir in the service. So actually the rabbinate discussed to bury it because there was no practical use anymore. And I think the point is also for the communities to see the value of the material, the historical value, or the musicological value, and the documentation. And then another point is that the material, I think this is something you mean as well, Alex, material which is available or in the universities or in archives. Often, there are these privacy issues that you can publish recordings only like 70 years after the death of the person, or of course in the case of Bloom, his widow, I guess she was okay with the recording to be published. So there are these legal issues always, and this is I think a main problem or challenge. But I think we are moving forward, and we are dealing with that a lot in our European Center for Jewish Music in Hannover as well.
Can I mention why I'm asking this? Because the recordings that we have, the commercial recordings, are concert pieces, and in many cases the cantor is completely different within the services, and because of the nusach and the modes of the services, which the person and the researcher wouldn't understand unless they knew what they were talking about. If you say I have a rubber mode or Freygish or something like that, these are the prime examples of the cantor at his best, doing what he knows or she knows best to do. The concert recordings were there for purely commercial reasons, so that people all over the world who couldn't afford or didn't live in America or somewhere else, who couldn't go to these concerts, had these live recordings of concert pieces. But they were there to show off the voice and the greatness of the cantor, where in the synagogue, it was the opposite. It was the great voice, but it was to show off the command of the understanding of the modes and the motifs of the services. And these were emotive in the sense that they were so beneficial to the communities at the time that came from the Haim or came from the pogroms and escaped to, whether it's America or UK or other parts of Europe, which was safe, to be able to, I would say, enjoy or to escape from the doldrums. And this is the connection. And you see it in the old Yiddish talkies as well. So this, to me, is the most important part of education, which is completely different from the commercial side of education. And that's the point I was trying to make.
Thank you. I wonder whether this is the moment that I should come in now and say that this has been a brilliant afternoon. We've actually overstepped the 2 hours, and what I love about COZ is that it's not rushed, and people do have a chance to talk, to play music, and to discuss with each other. So Martha, I want to thank you enormously for arranging this afternoon. It's been wonderful to hear Sylvia and Veronika, and what you've opened up is such a treasure trove of unresearched stuff there. So I'm sure that hopefully you will soon have more scholars with you to support you and help you and delve into so much more stuff that's available there. If I can say about the next couple of weeks, we are going to dive into the Nusach Wars. You know about the Nusach Wars, because next week, Alex Knapp and Charles Heller are giving a conversation called The Death of Nusach. And the following week, Cantor Jack Kessler and Cantor Hjalde Rebling are going to talk about the reinvigoration of Nusach. So there should be something really interesting for everybody in the Nusach Wars coming up soon. So hopefully, thank you again to Martha and to Sylvia and Veronika. If you want to send us any material to put with the report that Phil Alexander will be writing, send us the details, and we look forward to seeing you next week.